Pianist Benjamin Grosvenor will be performing for Chamber Music Maryland on Sunday, December 7th at 4 p.m. Smith Theatre, Howard Community College. On the program, three monumental works of piano literature: Ravel's Gaspard de la Nuit, Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, and opening the concert with Chopin's epic Second Piano Sonata, which has the very famous Funeral March.
I always think of it as sort of a psychological core of the work. It was actually written before the rest of the sonata, and I think you get a sense, particularly with that brief and strange last movement, that the piece builds towards it. And it's obviously such an extraordinary piece of writing and such a famous work. I mean, the whole program, you can almost say it's an ideal Halloween program, and unfortunately, I'm a bit late for that when I'm playing it in the States. But we have gnomes, and we have witches, and we have graveyards and gallows. The Chopin, obviously, the Funeral March, but Gaspard de la Nuit is music of the night. Each of the three pieces is inspired by a poem. The first, a water nymph attempts to seduce the poet to her water to come and join her in her watery lair. Le Gibet paints the picture of a man hanging from the gallows beyond the walls of a city with a bell tolling in the distance. And then Scarbo is an imp scaring the poet in the dead of the night. And then you have Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, which is such a unique piece. It gives you the experience of walking around an art gallery with promenades between each painting. Each time you're in a different mood as you walk from one painting to another. But it's also sort of a journey around the world because each picture has various international themes. You know, there's an Italian castle. We go to the Paris catacombs. We're in a Parisian garden. And it's also a tribute to his dead friend, the painter and architect Victor Hartmann. So it's a work that has a lot of different meanings.
There's so much to love about Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition. Right at the beginning, when we promenade through the museum and we promenade at different meters, it's so magical.
As you walk around the museum, the pictures affect you in different ways, and you get such a sense of that in Pictures at an Exhibition. You know, it starts quite boldly, but then later the promenades are pensive. And there's one where you feel like he's hurrying from one picture to another.
In addition to being an incredibly visual piece, it's also a memorial to a close friend.
The movement, which is really the most heartfelt tribute to his friend, is the catacombs and the music that comes after that. And you have the promenade again, the promenade theme come back again. Then it's this ghostly apparition of a promenade with these tremolos in the right hand. It's a wonderful texture and the most moving part of the work.
We're so used to hearing Pictures at an Exhibition in its orchestrated version. Do you think of that when you play this on the piano?
I don't really, because after all, it was initially a piano piece. Obviously, I grew up listening to the Ravel orchestration. In a way, I've come to agree with, shall we say, the Russian point of view. I think Ashkenazi held it, for example, who made his own orchestration, which is that the Ravel is almost a little bit too perfumed and opulent compared to the piano version, because there's a kind of savagery and directness in the piano version, which then Ashkenazi, for example, tries to create in his orchestration. And there's actually a lot of different orchestrations of this work, which is nothing to take away from the Ravel. He was a genius orchestrator, but I think there's a sort of different essence to the piece when you hear it in black and white, as it were, at the piano.
And it's interesting that Ravel, for all of his amazing orchestration talents, left Gaspard de la Nuit alone for the keyboard and La Valse alone for the orchestra.
Well, it's so interesting that so many of his works exist in these two forms, but of course, Gaspard Noé, although is purely a piano piece, he never orchestrated it. I think someone has tried to orchestrate it, so he saw that as a piece purely for the piano. And what a piano piece it is! I mean, he uses the instrument to its full extent in all three pieces. It's such inventive writing, and it's just a consistent joy to play for that reason. You can draw so many amazing sounds out of this music, and that's because of the notes he writes.
It's so interesting that Ravel, who maybe wasn't the greatest pianist in the world, wrote the most challenging piece in the piano repertoire with Gaspard de la Nuit.
Yes, that is interesting. Yes, from all accounts, he wasn't the finest pianist, but he obviously had such an understanding of the piano, even though perhaps he couldn't do it himself. But obviously, we don't have any record of him playing. But what an imagination he had, and he certainly understood writing for the piano. I mean, using Liszt as a model very often. I think in Gaspar, that's certainly true, and in some of his even earlier pieces like Jardin, I think Liszt was very much inspiration for him.
How do you think Ravel's piano music evolves over his career, or does it evolve?
I think the interesting thing about Ravel's music is how diverse it is in the styles that he embraces and the influences he has. So I don't know if there's a sort of linear progression. He absorbed so many things. I mean, I feel like the composer of Gaspar is so different to the composer of Tombeau de Couperin. I think the composer of Tombeau de Couperin with that sort of neo-Baroque thing he was doing is so different to the composer of Gaspar. And then, in his music also, there's sometimes this Basque influence that we hear in pieces like Aberrada de Grazioso, a little bit in piano concertos, and then also jazz, which he embraces in the piano concertos in particular. So, I mean, the ultimate craftsman is his music is perfection, really, and always embracing different styles and never sitting in one place.
Are there things you want us to think about before the recital and maybe take with us to the recital?
This program does have that sort of darkness at its core with the Chopin Sonata, which aside from the Funeral March is quite dramatic and dark work. The last movement, as I mentioned earlier, is quite strange and quite modern. I see it as looking a little forward to like Ravel and music of the 20th century, which is why I put the Ravel after the Chopin. I think it's an interesting transition. But then once the Chopin is finished, then the rest of the music is music of imagery. In the Ravel, it's poems. I'd say have a read of the poems before you come to the concert, and you'll really see that in the music. You'll see the words. The poems themselves conjure up quite visual imagery, and then Ravel also conjures up the same. And then in pictures, just the titles of the individual movements give us images, and Mussorgsky encapsulates them so well with the music that he writes. So it's hopefully music that inspires the imagination, and with the extra musical connections it has, it's music you can appreciate in a very special way.
I've been speaking via Zoom with pianist Benjamin Grosvenor. He is performing for Chamber Music Maryland on Sunday, December 7th at 4 p.m. Smith Theater, Howard Community College. You can go online to chambermusicmaryland.org. On the program, Ravel's Gaspard de la Nuit, Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, and Chopin's Piano Sonata No. 2.